Serious people who used to be anti-LGBTQ, but are now supportive. What changed your mind? One of the big things that I was told growing up was the gay agenda, and how LGBTQ people are trying to convince other people to become LGBTQ by corrupting people. It was the reason they had pride parades, and it was the reason why evil Hollywood wanted to have gay characters in their show. It's also why you couldn't just leave people alone. To be happy, you had to actively be against it, since them being gay is affecting you and your children if you don't do something about it. I believed this pretty much 100% until I actually started meeting gay people. During middle school there was really only one gay guy we knew of, and he was a really strange person which didn't help. During high school though, friends of mine started coming out as gay, and I usually ended up talking to at least one gay person a day. I realized they were just normal people, and not only that, but they were good people. They weren't there to convince anyone else to be gay. They were just trying to live a life where they could be happy. I was raised Mormon. My parents weren't the hateful type at all, so I wouldn't describe myself as aggressively anti-LGBTQ. I was raised to treat people with kindness and never name call or be cruel, but I did think that homosexuality was a sin. Even if I thought that we are all sinners and it wasn't my place to judge, I still realize looking back how toxic that was. I started questioning that in high school and college, that it didn't seem right for loving someone to be a sin. And I strongly oppose the church's support of Prop 8. That was the beginning of the end of my church membership, though it did take several years for me to really cut the cord. I can't really pinpoint a specific thing that changed my mind, partly because I never really felt hate or disgust towards LGBTQ people. I think it was a mixture of growing up and getting a better understanding of sexuality in general, and also witnessing the more vitriolic homophobia. I was pretty sheltered growing up, so once I realized all of the awful things that LGBTQ people have to endure, I realized that I didn't want anything remotely to do with that. Funny thing, those Bible verses about homosexuality were deliberately translated in a misleading way. The original Greek text condemned perversion. If we look at the context, it gets pretty clear that it was originally intended to go against pedophilia. Some homophobes in the 19th century mistranslated it, at least in part deliberately. So duck those translators and watch the pedophiles in the Catholic Church go to heck. This isn't true. People always try to make the Bible seem better than it is, but it supports tons of awful stuff, including homophobia. There are a couple of Old Testament verses that may have been against prostitution or pedophilia rather than homosexuality. Scholars disagree, but the one in the New Testament that mentions both male and female homosexuality and says God makes people gay as punishment for idolatry and then punishes them again for being gay and calls homosexuality unnatural and an error and shameful is absolutely about homosexuality. There's no other interpretation, and scholars all agree. There is historical context behind Romans that many people ignore and focus on the sentence or two about sex between same-sex couples. The context of that chapter was all about idolatry, that is, public drunken celebrations of Roman gods that often included group public sex, and did not focus on condemning homosexuality itself. They were condemning Romans and their way of life as a whole. Plenty of scholars agree that it wasn't about homosexuality at all, but instead about defiling the body in worship of false idols. There are those that disagree, but it is not some general consensus among scholars. There simply isn't enough information to go on, and since it isn't a completely black-white issue in the Bible, it's still pretty silly that people will use it to justify violence. Grew up in an homophobic Southern Baptist community. Then I went to university and met some actual gays. Realized that the gays I learned about growing up were made up caricatures, and that love is love. My departure from religion followed shortly afterwards. Same here, except with a different background. Honestly, just exposure on its own will do it. There's only so much hate you can feel towards someone until you start wondering how arbitrary it is. Interacting with people helps to actually view them as people, rather than abstract concepts representing what I was told was a bad thing in a vacuum. And in my case as well, it was due to growing up in an environment where it was just one of those life axioms. that you just accept as gospel. Although, I do have to say that I'm less quick to judge hateful people as bad people because from my experience seeing people close to me and knowing they are genuinely nice people, that hate can be their good intentions going through the lens of what they view as being right and wrong, and without having direct exposure to those people to second guess it. Not so much anti-gay as I held that marriage was between a man and a woman, and that a legal civil union for gay and lesbian couples was a reasonable equivalence. It was a political cartoon done by a student of mine comparing the situation to the lovings and interracial marriage that made me change my mind. Growing up, I came from a homophobic family and sadly I used to poke fun of gay and trans folks myself when I was young because I was parroting what my parents said at home. Thankfully I aged out of it by age 14ish. A little late I know, but it's better than never. I wouldn't characterize that as late, but perhaps it's just because I have a similar story to yours. I grew up in a very conservative religious family, and like you parroted a lot of what I heard, and just like you, around age 14 I started thinking more for myself and questioning the things I'd been brought up on. Eventually at 18 I left religion altogether, and over the years, since I've swung very far left economically and socially, lucky for me, the rest of my nuclear family started shifting in that direction later on. They're still religious, but they've given up on organized religion. I think 14 is probably around the time your brain becomes developed enough to start forming your own opinion on complex issues, rather than just reiterating what you've heard at home. I grew up, moved out of a super homophobic environment, and finally let go of the internalized homophobia. I was always told girls are just naturally flirtier, more comfortable with each other, and chalked up attraction to friendly admiration. I finally admitted to myself that I'm incredibly bi, and I missed out on so many opportunities because I avoided asking out crushes because they were girls, and I was secretly always afraid of some sort of conversion therapy situation. Regarding the transgender community, not so much anti, more ignorant to it. Actually, it wasn't until the whole J.K. Rowling situation last year did I sit up and take notice. My knee-jerk reaction was to agree full-heartedly with her, but then I went onto Twitter what a cesspit seriously and started to read different people's opinions. Then I started to Google about transgender people. The problem was I wasn't being empathetic. I never tried to imagine what it was like for a person who didn't belong in their body. The more I read into it, the more I support trans people. I know that everyone hates JK for what she said, but she has brought light onto a situation probably in the worst way and made me more open-minded than I was previously. Transgender people must go through heck and back on their journey, and they have my absolute respect. As for the LGBT community, I grew up in a very conservative family and I didn't know anyone who was openly gay. It wasn't until I had moved out and explored the world a little bit more did I consider it normal. Now, I can't believe the community is still getting hate all these years later. My 8-year-old son doesn't even question it when he sees a lesbian gay couple of TV. It's just normal to him, and that's the way it will stay. I'm so glad it's normal to you now. I was in the same boat. I didn't hate, but I also didn't fully understand. I had a few friends that were gay, but I didn't understand the trans men and women. Then I met a woman that was very open about her transition, and it really opened my eyes. I know not everyone who transitions is comfortable with taking about the whole process, but she is happy to talk about it in the hopes that taking about it will make it more normal for others struggling. She really opened my eyes about something I genuinely didn't understand, and I'm so thankful for her being that open about it. I reached out to her to ask if it was okay to share her story with my kid about how Auntie Y was born in the wrong body as a boy, but was always Auntie Y. My kid's response was just to say that she's glad Auntie Y is her true self and that she's very pretty. Sorry for the long story. It just makes me happy reading that other parents overcame their misunderstanding and chose to raise the next generation with a better understanding than we had. Growing up, my mother always taught me that being trans is a sin and that people who are ruining their bodies, that they were delusional or misled. There have been multiple times I've heard them use slurs against them. I even used to make horrible jokes and I genuinely just dislike them. Then I grew up and realized it's not weird or bad. Just different than what I was used to. Different isn't always bad. The older generation is just so scared of change. They won't let it happen. Even if it doesn't affect them. Turns out I'm actually non-binary, so jokes on them. I wouldn't consider myself ever homophobic. Yes, I used gay as an insult and I used the slur, but that was because I heard others around me using them in derogatory ways and I followed suit. I didn't really know what those words meant. And once I did learn, I don't think I ever felt negatively about gay people. That being said, I was a transphobic piece of shit. Again, this was me repeating what people around me were saying. But I knew what the words meant. But turns out I'm been new since 8th grade. That's when I basically dropped the majority of my homo-transphobia and I've been entirely accepting since. Similar story. Didn't realize those words were hurtful. Even had gay friends in college and used them backs and forth with them. I use those words while at the same time lashing out at homophobia around me. It probably sounds crazy to people today, but the true meaning and hurt behind those words wasn't fully understood. I'd never use them now. Same haven't for a good 15 years. Oh boy, not proud of this, but here we go. Father was very oppressive and horrible about minorities. He still is. He was the cool parent in the whole divorce ordeal, so naturally I looked up to him and took on board everything he said. So when he expressed his hate for minorities, I took that too. Also, my hateful tendencies weren't helped by me browsing 4chan. I'm not really sure what clicked, but I started to realize how bullshit it was that I hated people just because of who they were. They weren't harming me. They weren't bothering me. They were just being who they were. And if I was allowed to be free and be who I wanted to be, why should they be any different? Also, I realized I might not be as straight as I thought I was. I was raised very religious and taught to hate the sin, love the sinner. I believed that gay people were going to heck unless they repented and both became Christians and didn't act on their orientation. It wasn't until college that I met a bunch of wonderful out queers who somehow wanted to be friends with me. They patiently, compassionately, but firmly confronted by anti-LGBTQ attitudes. They didn't let me get away with saying homophobic shit, but they didn't abandon me as a friend either. I'm so grateful for their influence, their patience, and their courage in helping me change my mind. Without them, I'd probably still be a hateful fart and maybe would have never realized that I'm queer too. My then brother came out as transgender. I didn't hate people who were trans. I just didn't understand it and kept my distance. When she came out to my parents and I, there was a heavy silence in the room. So I said, well, you may not be a boy, but you're still the best friend I've known for my entire life. And that'll never change to convey my support. It's been a lot of growth and adjustment for everyone involved, but we've accepted who she is with open arms. I grew up in the church. Then when I moved to uni, I met new people, went out and made my own friends, spoke to people, and finally actually grew up. I've apologized to people I've treated badly in the past because of it. Realized that I myself aren't 100% straight, even though I'm happily married to a man I'm F, and I'm now proudly referred to as the queerest, mostly straight person best friend knows. It took a hard look at myself and the church, but I'm glad I grew up and realized that all anyone wants is love and acceptance for who they are. I wasn't really anti, but I just followed what my mom and grandma thought. I grew up with only them and believed that it was wrong. Somewhere around 4th or 5th grade, I started falling in love with a female classmate. I think it was just puppy love, but I don't know, I knew, which kinda made me think I'm gross for that. Cause my grandma had started saying even more homophobic stuff. I later realized at around age 13 that I was wrong and maybe part of it myself. I'm currently a closeted pansexual. Plus my best friend ended up coming out and it helped me understand the beauty of just being yourself, at least to the people who you trust and who support you. And for that I'm forever grateful to her. Peace. I never told my feelings my fellow female classmate cause she started being a bully against everyone else. It was honestly due to me questioning my own sexuality. I originally questioned it a bit back in like 6th grade, but in my mind, I viewed being LGBTQ as a bad thing. So I pushed those thoughts away for a while until recently. My mom, sister, and my best friend know that I'm starting to question my sexuality and said they would fully accept and support me, which I'm glad about. But I'm nervous about what my dad might think, since he was the main reason those thoughts of LGBTQ bad came from. I'm genderqueer, but I didn't know that as a kid. I liked a lot of feminine things, which my friends and parents bullied reprehended me for. This caused me to internalize a lot of toxic masculinity anti-LGBTQ rhetorics. I also was a little shit who thought edgy jokes was funny. Then I made some LGBTQ friends in college and started learning about LGBTQ history's issues and realized how their lives are affected by these rhetorics. I also realized that I was much more comfortable being around them than my old friends and family, which helped me understand who I'm more. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.